This is the Blood Red Podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello everybody and welcome along to the Liverpool Echo's Blood Red channel for a special edition of the Blood Red Podcast. The main Blood Red podcast show will take place tomorrow on Tuesday. For today's episode, you join me, Patrick Smith, for a preview of the upcoming Under-21 Euros. Well, joining me to look at what is likely to be the most exciting and probably interesting Euros, Under-21 Euros, certainly in my lifetime, is Liverpool.com writer Ben Bocsack. Ben, how's things?
Yeah, very well. All good, yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I'm very good. So let's get stuck into it then, shall we, Ben? Most listeners might be, a tad confused right now, maybe, or not sure, but a general overview. This really could be a great tournament, actually, both for neutrals, but specifically Liverpool supporters. There is a lot of potential interest, isn't there?
Yeah, like you mentioned, obviously, lots of interested players being involved at this tournament or who are on Liverpool's radar. But at the same time, just in terms of the general quality as well, a lot of players have dropped back from their senior team to represent their under-21 sides. I think one of the hosts, Georgia, I was looking at their squad, 8 or 9 players in the squad who have already played at senior international level. That could have been one more, with Kvaratskhelia being very determined to play at this tournament, but Napoli have pulled the plug on that. However, looking at other teams, even at Georgia, Valencia's goalkeeper Mamardashvili, who's being linked with big moves to Chelsea and Premier League interest in him, he's going to be involved, which, he's the first choice keeper at senior level. The fact that he's going to be involved at all these senior games and then come back down to play under 21 football, it says a lot. And then obviously we're talking about one of the most expensive transfers as well in Mykhailo Mudryk, who assisted last week. He assisted 2 goals for the senior team, senior Ukraine national team, but he's also dropping back down to play at under 21 level for Ukraine. And I think I was looking at Italy squad, you have likes of Sandro Tonali, who's going to be involved. I mean, even Italy squad, there's a lot of players who've already played for the senior national team. I think 7 or 8 in their squad. So it's going to be interesting because I think there's going to be a mixture of squads. There's going to be some national teams like Spain you expect to do well, but for example, they haven't called up anyone who's represented them at senior level, and no one has dropped back down. And we could be, Spain's squad could be extremely talented if the senior players drop down, the likes of Gavi, Pedri, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's going to be a very interesting tournament, and there's a reason why I said it could be one of the most interesting one in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I think so, as you alluded to there, it's crazy how many big name players dropping down. Like Sandro Tonali was one I wasn't actually aware of, but that's a massive player to be playing in the 21 Euros. And imagine if Khephren was playing for the Georgia 21s in this tournament. That would be a huge side, maybe, because obviously they are hosting it. Because the Under 21 Euros kicks off Wednesday this week, doesn't it? Hosted in Romania, and then of course Georgia as well, where Kvaratskhelia is from. Only players born in this millennium are eligible to play. So if that doesn't make you feel old, I don't know what will. But anyway, let's get back to the Liverpool interest, shall we? Because this is a Liverpool podcast. So let's start with the current players, Harvey, Elliott and Curtis Jones. They'll be probably the heartbeat, I'd say, of a strong-looking England side, won't they, Ben? Lots of big-name Premier League players in that team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because obviously Jacob Ramsey is in the squad as well, and you'd expect him to start. So I'm curious as to how the England midfield is going to line up. But I think it was very interesting. England under 21s played a sort of friendly leading up to this tournament against Japan, and one of the Japanese midfielders sort of mentioned how Elliott was the most impressive that he came up against in that England squad. Kind of criticised some of the other players, Smith Rowe and Skip in particular, said that they didn't impress him, but Elliott did, and Elliott was kind of a nuisance to play against. That's what the Japanese players said. Obviously, England lost that game 2-0, which would have been, I think, a surprise to many, but Japan is quite strong. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how involved they will be. I mean, because I wouldn't say this England team is like supremely talented, but there's a lot of players at a sort of similar level to Jones and Elliott, which means it all depends on the decision making of the manager and who he favors. And I wouldn't be surprised to see, the team being very heavily rotated as well. I mean, there's a lot of players in there who've played a lot of games too, so it's going to be interesting. But you'd expect Jones, with the form that he's in, to do well, and I think Elliott as well.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it pans out with England, because as you say, there's lots of players who sort of play the same position and are all at the same level. I mean, because you can't really have a side that has Harvey Elliott, Curtis Jones, and Jacob Ramsey in one midfield, because it's not exactly the best balances. I mean, do you think there's a chance that, because both players, Jones and Elliott, can play out wide, do you think there's a chance they play on the wings? Maybe even see some of them in a false nine, because that England squad, they don't seem to have an out-and-out striker as such. I mean, there's Cameron Archer, but they've got Madueke and Smith Rowe. I mean, do you reckon we could potentially see Harvey Elliott maybe play a false nine role?
Yeah, or Jones. I mean, either of them could potentially do it. I think that's probably one way. I think Elliott might be used on the wings because he's been used on the wings a lot at international level. I think Jones they probably see as more of a midfielder, but he can also play on the wings. And like you mentioned, I mean, you have Anthony Gordon and Madueke on the wings, but apart from that, not really that much width. Like we said, there's a lot of sort of attacking midfielders in that squad who are kind of versatile, and it's going to be interesting to see how they line up. I mean, Jones was in pretty good form heading into this tournament, not just for Liverpool, but for the under-21s as well. I think just before he kind of broke into the Liverpool first team again, he scored on international duty and was doing quite well. So I'd expect him to probably be more involved than Elliott. I mean, I think something worth mentioning as well when it comes to Elliott is he is the youngest member in this England squad. I think Levi Colwill is a few months older than him, so Elliott beats him just by a few months. But I think for Elliott as well, maybe the coach will be thinking, he's got probably maybe 3 years of still being eligible and playing at under-21 tournaments. So he might prioritize someone like Jones who might not be able to feature in the next one.
I mean, yeah, it's crazy. Forget how young Harvey Elliott is, don't you? I mean, because he plays beyond his years. It feels like he's been around for ages, and then he's obviously been playing for Liverpool for around 4 or 5 years, isn't he? Crazy how young he still actually is. Yeah, it'll be certainly an interesting one for Liverpool fans to keep an eye on. I think Curtis Jones will undoubtedly be involved. I mean, the form he's been in the past few months for Liverpool, he has to be, the heartbeat of that England midfield. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't playing in most matches. But yeah, you mentioned Levi Colwill there, but, sort of loose Liverpool transfer. I'm not going to touch on that one because I can't see Chelsea letting them go, to be honest. But let's move on, though, shall we, to some more transfer rumored players with Liverpool. We've got to start with France, haven't we, Ben? I mean, this is the one that's going to pique the listeners' interest. Let's speak of midfield engine rooms again. Khephren Thuram and Manu Kone expected to play together again. Ben, I think you spoke to the former youth team manager, didn't you, a couple of weeks ago? I mean, what can we expect then from Thuram and Kone as a duo? Because there's quite a lot of potential. We could see them in a red shirt together next season, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the important thing is like they've played together, like you mentioned. I spoke to their academy coach before. They played together at academy level only for one season, but they know each other well from that time at ACBB. But even on the international level, they've played, I think, I was looking at Transfermarkt recently, and they've played, I think, around 11 or 12 games together already at various youth levels. So they're very used to each other. And I think in terms of this French team, I expect Kone to be the sort of holding midfielder and Khephren playing on the left. But I think it's worth noting as well that this French team is extremely talented and just beyond Thuram and Kone, especially the midfield. I mean, you have Michael Olise being involved in that midfield and a lot of other players as well who probably, if they weren't French, they would be representing international senior teams and have had a handful of caps by now. I think as well it's worth giving a shout to Yasser Larouti, who is, of course, spent time at Liverpool's academy, and he earned a call-up, which is credit to him because this is a really talented under-21 squad, and the fact that he's been called up is a testament to how well he's done in France since he's left Liverpool.
Oh yeah, I mean it's no easy feat making any France squad, but this one is particularly stacked. I mean the talent they can churn out with their young footballers is absolutely crazy, and they're always threats in these tournaments. But yeah, I mean Khephren Thuram, then, as you mentioned there, I mean he's been heavily linked with Liverpool. He looks the most likely to sign of the names that we'll discuss throughout this podcast. I mean, what do you think he can bring to the Liverpool midfield? Because some people might be confused that you said there he'll play on the left, not in the six. I mean, someone who's 6'4" in stature, big physical runner, but there's a lot more to him than that, isn't there, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think his defensive qualities are that impressive. I think his offensive qualities are a lot better in terms of his ability to progress the ball. He's just someone who's got a lot of energy. I mean, when I spoke to his coach, the first thing that stood out to him, he told me, was he just ran so much. And it was the same thing with Manu Kone. So it's going to be very interesting to see them, function together, the amount of energy that they bring to the team. And obviously, those are things that Liverpool really lacked in midfield the last season. So that's, I think, one of the most important things that Thuram could bring. And I forgot to mention, but Enzo Lefebvre, who obviously has been linked with Liverpool as well in the past, Borussia Dortmund as well, he's also in the squad. So he's another one. When I talk about energy, that's the first thing that stands out to you. So I think just in general from this French under-21 squad, I expect a lot of energy, a lot of running, and I feel like they're going to tire out a lot of opponents at this tournament.
Yeah, I've got a big family friend who's a Lorient fan, so I've heard all about Enzo Lefebvre for the past 5 years. He's an amazing player. I mean, he's finally had his breakthrough season this year. He'll be on the move and potentially one to watch Liverpool, as you say. He's got a great skill set. But yeah, I think Khephren Thuram there, as you mentioned, the big, powerful runner, great going forward. I think he'd be absolutely perfect for the Liverpool midfield. But Manu Kone, then, how is he different to Thuram? I mean, what difference could he offer to the Liverpool midfield? How are they different, the two players?
I think Kone is more comfortable for sure playing in a holding midfield position. I mean, like I mentioned, his academy coach played him behind Thuram for that season they spent together. And if you look at sort of how he's played for Borussia Mönchengladbach, he has been part of a sort of double pivot as a holding midfielder. He is also comfortable going forward, and he does have very good qualities in terms of progressing the ball, but I do see him as a better defender and someone who is more suited to that Fabinho role, although I do have some question marks because, like I mentioned, he's been playing in a double pivot. He's very rarely done the holding midfield role on his own. But I do think he's someone who's more defensive, and I think for him, his sort of aggression and reading of the game is what stands out for me, and his defensive qualities.
Yeah, well, I mean, two players definitely to keep an eye on. France in general, a team that, Liverpool fans, you should 100% be keeping an eye on. A crazy number of young players that are so talented, as I said. Maybe they'll even face off against Jones and Elliott at some point as well. That'd be a nice one to see, wouldn't it? But I mean, maybe there's a France-England knockout tie on the cards. But yeah, let's move on then, shall we, to our next side. Let's talk about the Dutch, shall we? There's some more Liverpool interest. Sepp van den Berg, Ben. He'll be representing the Dutch under-21s. His contract at Liverpool is up at the end of next year. Do you think he could maybe be playing for, his last chance at a place there, or is he just playing to maybe get himself a move elsewhere this summer?
I think it's an interesting one, but I do think, had he had a more sort of regular season at Schalke and didn't get that injury, I think we could be having a conversation where we're saying, is this the time now for Van den Berg to be promoted? I mean, he's someone who at Preston played a lot at right back, and with Trent Alexander-Arnold's new role, that's something that he could offer to the team that I think Klopp doesn't really have at the moment. And of course, he can play as a centre back as well. But I think just because he didn't quite get to showcase his talent as much at Schalke because of that injury, I think it's time for him to probably go on another loan. And I think he could still get a contract extension as well at Liverpool. I think if Liverpool do send him out on loan, I'd expect them to sign a contract extension and keep him at the club for longer, because I do think there's a lot of potential in him, and I think it's testament to his quality that he did get called up to this Dutch team because they do have some strong defenders.
Yeah, they really do. I mean, still only 21 as well. It's crazy how many of these players, you forget how young they actually are. I mean, that's very young, especially for a defender. They come into their prime to 30s sometimes, don't they? But yeah, I mean, as you say, they could be ideal for that right-hand side centre-half role that Konate sort of adopted in the past few months. Maybe in the future he could take on that one. But let's keep on then, shall we, with the Dutch defenders, because we've got Micky van der Ven, haven't we, Ben? I mean, very exciting young centre-back, left-footed, absolutely rapid, somewhat rash, but quite keen for a tackle. He's another player that Jurgen Klopp, I'm sure, will be keeping an eye on during this tournament, won't he?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And not just Jurgen Klopp, but probably Jörg Schmatke as well. I mean, he knows him well from Wolfsburg. And obviously, I think the curious thing is he going to line up next to Van den Berg? Because that's going to be an interesting sort of relationship to keep an eye on from a Liverpool perspective. If they partner each other at the back, I'm going to be interested in how they function together, because you never know. I mean, who knows? Yeah. Maybe in 5 years' time, that could be a future Liverpool centre-back partnership. But yeah, I do think Van der Ven is very talented. He's had a good season at Wolfsburg. And I think, he plays in a position where Liverpool I would like to see Liverpool bring in someone because, Virgil van Dijk is getting older. I mean, that's just the facts. And, as you get older, you do tend to decline. And I think to head into this to next season without a backup for him, I haven't been convinced by Gomez or Konate playing on the left side. I think Konate is a brilliant defender, but he's much better suited to the left side. Same with Gomez. So I would like to bring in someone who can cover for Van Dijk and even potentially push him. And, I think added competition is always a positive for players of who are world class, and Van Dijk can be world class, and he does probably hopefully have a couple more years at the top of his game. And I think right now he just needs to be maybe pushed a little bit, and that competition could inspire him to rediscover his form.
No, yeah, I hope Van Dijk has many more years as well. But I think, as you say, that he's on the wrong side of 30, and players do start to decline then. But players who played in the Jurgen Klopp system especially start to decline way faster than other teams. And obviously he's had that huge injury as well. It's a shame to see. But I think, a centre-half for me, one who can play on the left-hand side, who's left-footed, should be an absolute priority for Liverpool in this window. I mean, I think that's what they're crying out for, just to give Van Dijk a bit of rest, to be honest. And when you bring in a replacement in, you're not playing one of Gomez, Matip or Konate on the left-hand side, which I don't think they technically thrive in. I mean, I think having a left footer would just open the game more, especially with this new formation and tactics Liverpool have adopted, because they are different positions. People often forget playing on the left and the right of centre-half is actually a very different game. And if you're not used to the movements of opening up your body on that left-hand side, yeah, I mean, Van der Ven on that note would be one of the names, probably the top name I'd go for, just because he's got age on his side. And it'd be interesting to see, as you say, him playing alongside Van den Berg, because that could potentially be Liverpool, but back two in the next 5 years. You never know how it's going to pan out. But yeah, let's move on into the next player, staying with the Dutch. I mean, we've mentioned, the huge names that are playing in this tournament. And if you're going off value and reputation, Ryan Gravenberch is the one. Another midfielder linked with Liverpool, Ben, isn't he? Hasn't quite fulfilled his potential at Bayern so far. Is this one more of a risky move for Schmatke and Klopp, though, do you think?
I think depending on the fee, it's all dependent on the fee. If you can get him for the kind of transfer fees that's been talked about, around 30 to 40 million, I don't see it necessarily as that much of a risk. I mean, he was born in 2002, so he's still really young. Like with Elliott, you almost forget how young he is because he's been around for such a long time at Ajax. I think he played almost 100 games for their first team. Yeah, he hasn't quite kicked on at Bayern, but I mean, I wouldn't have expected him to. Bayern's midfield is really strong, and Joshua Kimmich is probably one of the best holding midfielders in the world still. And on top of that, you have Leon Goretzka and a host of other midfielders, so it's difficult to break into that team. And I think because of that, I don't necessarily see him as a risk at 30, 40 million, around that price range. He's someone as well, I think, who Pep Linders will know about, and similar to Cody Gakpo, I think Linders' influence could be crucial in getting the best out of him. But yeah, I think in terms of his attitude as well, he seems to have, he's been linked heavily with all these clubs, but I really liked his interview where he spoke about, I just want to play football and my priority is to do that at Bayern. But if that's not the case, I'm going to have talks with the club and I'm going to try and get, play elsewhere and get those minutes. So it doesn't necessarily be, he's not necessarily pushing for a move, but he does want to play. And I think that's the right attitude to have.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because as you say, he was so good for Ajax, one of the most wanted young midfielders in Europe. I think he's been quite unlucky at Bayern because obviously you said there how good Goretzka and Kimmich are, but then Musiala's, had the season of his life so far. I mean, he's a great player before that, anyway, we knew that, but maybe Gravenberch was expecting to battle with him for minutes this season, but the form of Musiala's just sort of blown his chances out of the water, I think, on that note. So maybe it's an interesting one that Klopp and Schmadtke could go for, but we'll see how that one pans out. Let's move on then to the next team, and the last team we'll probably talk about specifically in Spain. Stefan Bajcetic, of course, Liverpool interest. He would have been called up if it wasn't for that injury he got at the end of the season. Very unfortunate for him because I'm sure he would have got a starting role on this Spain side. I mean, the way he was playing for Liverpool, I've been very surprised if he hadn't been. But let's move on to another transfer rumor. Gabri Veiga, undoubtedly, will be one of their crucial midfielders, probably the focal point of their attacking play. It's been amazing for Celta Vigo this season, Ben, hasn't he? I mean, do you think he could be the goals from midfield that Liverpool so desperately need at the moment?
Yeah, I think as well, just because he plays right-sided midfield, and Liverpool have been linked with a lot of left-sided midfielders. In Thuram, McAllister's already signed. And then on top of that, even Kone, I said when he plays in a double pivot, he plays on the left. So just purely on the basis of what Liverpool have been linked with, I think even Gravenberch, who we talked about, he tends to play on the left side. So in that sense, I think Liverpool do need a right-sided central midfielder as well, who can play in a midfield three on that right side. And I think he fits into that category really well. He's someone, I would say he's someone who Liverpool haven't had since probably Adam Lallana in terms of, being able to score from midfield. I know McAllister scored 10 goals in the Premier League, but I think a few of his goals anyway were from the penalty spot. So Veiga, on the other hand, he tends to score from open play, so he's more of a threat in that sense. I think at this tournament, it's going to be interesting to see how he does. I mean, obviously, he played the starring role for Celta Vigo, but now I think he's going to be playing a starring role in the Spanish under-21 team at this tournament, because like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, Spain haven't really recalled any of the players they could have recalled from the senior squad, the likes of Ansu Fati, Gavi or Pedri. None of those players are going to be involved in this tournament. It's going to be players who haven't played at senior level. And I think because of that, Veiga is probably one of the best players that they have, just based on the season that he's had. And I think, you often see players who have more responsibility stepping up, or it's kind of like a make it or break it for him. If he has a good tournament, then clearly I think more clubs are going to be interested in him, and I think it's going to be a good test to his character and how well he would fit in at Liverpool, because when he's coming into Liverpool, he's going to be coming into a competitive environment where he will need to fight for a place, and I think he needs to show a bit of his star potential and star quality. I mean, it's easy to do it at your boyhood club where everyone loves you, and Celta Vigo, he's come through the academy, he loves the club and the fans love him, so it's easy to do that. But in a different environment, I think that's going to be a test for him, and I'm looking forward to see how he rises to that challenge, because I do think he's got a lot of qualities and the potential to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there a Celta Vigo, Ben, and his adoration for the club and their adoration for him is giving me flashbacks of Iago Aspas. I'm sure some of our listeners will be having dreadful thoughts of that transfer as well, because it's a similar tone. But I mean, yeah, Veiga, I mean, you have to be careful because I've not exactly seen much of him play. I've just seen snippets where you have to be very careful with what you see. But he looks fantastic. I mean, I'd be really interested to see him play in Liverpool midfield. I've just had a quick look there. 15 goal contributions in the league this season from midfield. It's about a goal contribution every other match in the minutes played. So, a very exciting midfield talent. But I mean, yeah, just on your point there about, Spain not necessarily bringing players down from the first. I think that's a good thing for them because, they won the Nations League last night with the players of, Gavi, Ansu Fati, etc. I mean, they've already proven they can do it on the big stage. Whilst, it would be maybe nice for them to win in the 21 Euros, I think it makes sense if you're having that, the new generation coming through. Give the new players a chance like this Spain side are going to do, because there are a few rogue names in there, and maybe a few of them will pop up and excite us out of nowhere. I'm sure they definitely will, because Spain, in my memory of this tournament anyway, have always done relatively well. You think back to the days of Thiago Alcantara. I mean, you think he won player of the tournament when they won it. It must have been 2013 or 2012 or something. Liverpool player now, but maybe someone could burst on the scene like Thiago did back then. But yeah, Ben, so we've spoken about the stacked talent in this year's tournament. Are there any other players then from any other teams, maybe some more obscure shouts you've got that Liverpool should have an eye on?
I think the host Georgia, I kind of want to watch, just because they called back so many players from senior level, and they've got a few big talents, I think, who are being linked with moves to European top 5 leagues. Like I think one in particular in Gabriel Sigua, who's might necessarily not play at this tournament because he's still 17. He's one of the youngest at the tournament. He was born in 2005, but he's already playing for Dinamo Tbili's senior team and getting goals and assists at senior level. And obviously this is an academy that has recently produced the likes of Kvaratskhelia and Mamardashvili, who's being linked with Chelsea. So yeah, I would keep my eyes on Georgia, just because I think the fact that they're going to be playing in front of a home crowd, they're in an extremely difficult group though, mind you. I think that if it's going to be impressive if they can get out of the group that they're in, but if they do, I think they're one to watch. And probably Ukraine as well. I think like I said, they record Mudryk and they have a lot of talented players as well. I think those are the two countries that I would keep an eye on, who could surprise a few. But in terms of the favourites, I think Italy is worth a watch. They have players who have come back from senior level and who could play a big role. And I think someone who's been linked with a move to Liverpool, I don't know how credible the rumours are, but Scalvini is someone who I think is worth keeping an eye on. But yeah, I think that's about it. I think obviously the French team is supremely talented as well, so there's going to be plenty to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Scalvini, a very tidy centre-half playing for Atalanta, I believe, isn't he? And of course, Sandro Tonali, you mentioned, I can't believe he's playing in the tournament from. That's absolutely crazy. But so the tournament starts on Wednesday. I, for one, am definitely going to be watching this where possible, as Liverpool seemingly set their sights on another couple of midfielders. We've got Khephren Thuram, Manu Kone, Ryan Gravenberch, Gabri Veiga, all in action. Whilst, of course, I obviously hope that the Liverpool boys, Harvey, Elliott and Elliott Jones, can pick up some silverware for their part. But I maybe don't want England to win that one. I'm sure most of our listeners agree that they don't exactly support the England national team, I'll say politely. But that just about wraps us up there, Ben. As mentioned at the top of the show, everyone, the Blood Red podcast will return tomorrow on Tuesday rather than the usual Monday. So make sure you subscribe to the Blood Red YouTube channel and subscribe on whichever platform you get your podcasts from, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the others, so you don't miss any of our daily content. But for now, from myself, Patrick Smith, and Liverpool.com's Ben Bocsack, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you again soon.
You've been listening to the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.